ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते. So welcome to our weekly Saturday session. Today we will have one session on some of the what we call Mahavakya, the great sentences of Upanishads. One of those sentences is Aham Brahmasmi, another is Tattvamasi, then I am Atma Brahma. Now, these are in the context of who am I? This question has been raised that once you become one with the Supreme, do you actually become Supreme? Now, that is a question which has been debated over centuries and has remained unanswered till today. So we will try to, find some answers if we can on this issue. So the question is that after yoga, after you become one with the Supreme, do you become Brahma? Do you become Supreme? Now, this is a question which has, initially was by Adi Sankaracharya. He propounded this philosophy of Advait Vedanta, that you become one. There are no dualities. Everything comes from one. And once they become one, then they become Brahman. In modern time, it is called the principle of, oneness. But there are some different views on this issue, and those are also by very profound scholars. My fundamental view is that we don't have to get into those, views at all, but it is better to clarify our mind what this situation is all about. So we will go over some of these issues from the time of Advait Vedanta of Adi Shankaracharya. And what he actually said, Adi Shankaracharya said, and I will read out one of his quotes. This is also called monism, that is oneness or monism or Advait. The external world is an illusion. The underlying reality is one that is called Brahma. So once you get out of the external world and become one with the Supreme, then you become Brahma. Then this is also actually propounded by people who believe in Shiva, that is Shaivik, principles, Siddhant. That says that the whole world has evolved from one. The whole world is sustained by one. The whole world will merge into one, and this is Shiva. So there also it is a question of one. Then there's another thought is that once I thought disappear, that I exist, I should disappear, then you experience unity of the universe, and then you become Brahma. So these are some of the concepts which have come into Vedic writings, and they have been propounded and supported by many scholars over centuries. Today also, Advait Vedanta is one of the most profound philosophy of India. And all those who believe in Advait Vedanta, they believe that once you become one with the Supreme, you become Brahma. They also compare it with what we call Ghat Akash and Chit Akash. You have great space all around us, and we create a Ghada. Now that Ghada has a wall, and there's a space inside the wall, which is actually is Ghada. Like we create a house, and once the Ghada is broken, the walls are broken, the space merges into space. and it becomes one. So that is what their approach is. That once that ghada is broken or the body is broken and you become one with the Supreme, then you become one. Now, Madhvacharya is one of the great philosophers. They came in 12th century onwards. And he came out with the concept of Dvait Vedanta, the dualist thought. He felt that Paramatma and Jeevatma are not the same. There's difference between the two. And the Jeevatma can never become Paramatma. Now that has been thought. I think Tarun had raised this issue some time ago. Now he says that Jivatma actually uh, is a small particle of Paramatma, and it is subject to Maya. It is subject to the principles of nature. Nature is actually Maya. And this is embedded in the nature, and therefore it is subject to Sukh and Dukh. It has to tolerate all the pains and pleasures of life. While Paramatma is all away from Maya, he is not subject to Sukh and Dukh, and he is not Ans, he is not a small particle, he is Vibhu. The Sanskrit word is Vibhu. That is, he is everywhere, he is Purn, complete. So his viewpoint is that you cannot compare Jivatma and Paramatma. And there are some similarities, that is, both of them are without any origin and they are eternal, they never die, both of them. But Jivatma is subject to the principles of nature, that is Maya, and it is passing through the process of pain and pleasure because of birth and rebirth. And the theory of action applies to that, but not Paramatma. Now, there are some finer distinctions in that also. There are some great scholars have come out with what you call Visist Dvait, or there are some other smaller variations on all that. So now the question arises whether when we become one with the Supreme, do we become Supreme? Now we will try to answer this question through Bhagavad Gita, because we have studied Bhagavad Gita, and therefore let us go over to some of the uh, you know statements given by Lord Krishna, the Supreme Himself. And then we will reach a conclusion of our own without getting into, the one way or the other. So the first thing which we will go is chapter 2, verse number 20, 22, 23, and 25. Now, verse number 20 says, न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचन नायम भूत्वा भविता वा न भूये अजो नित्य शाश्वतो अयम पुराणो न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे. दैट ये आत्मा न किसी काल में जन्म लेता है, न किसी काल में मरता है, न उत्पन्न होके वापस जन्म लेने वाला है. ये तो अजन्मा, नित्य, सनातन और पुरातन है. So it is very clear from this that Atma, that is Jivatma, is also eternal, like the Supreme. It is not born, it is not destroyed, it cannot be destroyed by any weapon. That verse will come further down. Then in verse number 22, he says, Vansasi jirnani yatha vihai, navani grahati naroparani, तथा शरीराणि विहाय जीर्णान्यांति संयाति navani dehi. That as our clothes are torn and we throw them away, similarly, the body, when it becomes torn or ineffective or not able to function properly, the soul changes the body and soul remains eternal. So this is another. Then the famous verse that Nainam chiddati sadrani, Nainam dahati pauke, न चैनम क्लेदयन्त्यापो, न सोस्यति marute. That this Atma cannot be cut by weapons, it cannot be burnt by fire, it cannot be made wet by water, and it cannot be dried by air. It is beyond all that. So, from all these, what Lord Krishna has said, it becomes absolutely clear that Atma is eternal, it existed forever, and it will exist forever, like Paramatma. Then we have to also understand this verse number 25. This is very clear too that यह आत्मा अव्यक्त है, यह आत्मा अचिंत्य है, यह आत्मा विकार रहित कहा गया है. इससे अर्जुन इस आत्मा को उपयुक्त प्रकार से जानकर तू शोक करने के लिए योग्य नहीं है. That it is not sensible. Avyakt means you cannot understand with sense organs or mind or intellect. Achintya means you cannot understand with mind, you cannot thought about it. And ये आत्मा विकार रहित है, that it is without any qualities. There's absolutely no quality, it's absolutely pure all the time. There's no movement or nothing in this. It's absolutely as it is all the time. So this part has become very clear from these verses of chapter 2. Then let's go to chapter number 4 and verse number 5 and 6. Verse number 5, he says, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani tev charjun Tyannaham ved sarvani न त्वम वेद परम तप. हे परम तप अर्जुन, मेरे और तेरे बहुत से जन्म पहले हो चुके हैं, उन सबको तू नहीं जानता परंतु मैं जानता हूं. Now here the difference comes that Paramatma knows all the births which you have passed through, but we do not know. So there is one difference here which he is elaborating. So there is some difference. That is what Lord Krishna is saying here. Then the next verse further elaborates it. मैं अजन्मा और अविनाशी स्वरूप होते हुए भी, समस्त प्राणियों का ईश्वर होते हुए भी, अपनी प्रकृति को अधीन करके योग माया से प्रकट होता हूं. Now that is another thing. That I am the sustainer of the entire universe. And I am also Avinashi, that is eternal. I, not born and not subject to any depreciation or destruction. सभी प्राणियों का ईश्वर, that I look after the entire universe. But I appear by subordinating my real, existence. Now here also there is a difference. It says that Ishwar means he is the one who looks after the entire universe. We can't say that we look after the entire universe. So there's a difference between Paramatma and Atma. Paramatma is a much larger force than Atma, which is, confined to one single body. It is a human body, but it is also a body of an ant or a mosquito. There is an Atma which is confined to that particular body. So this is a difference which comes up here, which we have to understand. We will analyze this subsequently. Now let's go to chapter 8, verse number 18. संपूर्ण चराचर भूतगण ब्रह्मा के दिन के प्रवेश काल में अव्यक्त से, अर्थात ब्रह्मा के सूक्ष्म शरीर से उत्पन्न होते हैं और रात्रि के प्रवेश काल में उस अव्यक्त नामक ब्रह्मा के सूक्ष्म शरीर में लीन हो जाते हैं. So all this happens to Jivatma. Jivatmas arise from the, non-manifest or very, very, smallest, body of the Brahma, and then they dissolve into that at the end of the Kalp. So that is the movement of individual souls, that they arise from somewhere in the beginning of the day, and then they dissolve at the end of the day of Brahma, which is the Kalp. And that doesn't apply to the Paramatma. Paramatma actually gives birth to Brahma, not coming out of him and getting dissolved into him. Now, if we go to verse number 13, there are some verses which we should study. Now, verse number 20, कार्य और करण को उत्पन्न करने में हेतु प्रकृति कही जाती है, और जीवात्मा सुख दुख के भोक्तापन में अर्थात भोगने में हेतु कहा गया है. Now he is clearly giving a distinction here that karya and karan, these impact on jivatma, and because of that the embedded soul, the soul embedded in the body, is subject to pain and pleasure because of that process. Then, verse number 21, प्रकृति में स्थित पुरुष प्रकृति से उत्पन्न त्रिगुणात्मक पदार्थों को भोगता है, और इन गुणों का संग ही इस जीवात्मा को अच्छी बुरी योनियों में ले जाने का कारण. Now, again, he's saying that the human soul is subject to the processes of nature, and those natures are governed by three principal qualities, that is Sat, Raj, and Tam. And those qualities and the actions associated with it are responsible for taking us in good yonis or bad yonis, that is good species of life, that is the human being, or other species of life like animals or insects and whatever. Then a verse number 19 of this chapter says that prakriti और पुरुष इन दोनों को तू अनादि जान, that prakriti is also anadi, that is also without origin. So there are three things here. The human soul is anadi, that has no origin, it always existed. The prakriti, that is the nature or maya, it has always existed. And the supreme, the Paramatma, has also always existed. So these distinctions are there according to Bhagavad Gita itself. And this will be further clarified in verses 7 and 8 of chapter 15. Let's see these verses. इस देह में यह सनातन जीवात्मा मेरा अंश है, मेरा अंश है, that he is not me, मेरा अंश है, और वही इस प्रकृति में स्थित मन और पांचों इंद्रियों को आकर्षित करता है. मैम वंशो जीव लोके, that this is my particle in the body. So this is somewhat different than me. Paramatma is not there, his particle is there. The ocean is not there, it is a drop of the ocean which is there. Then verse number 8 of chapter 15. वायु गंध के स्थान से गंध को जैसे ग्रहण करके ले जाता है, वैसे ही देहादि का स्वामी जीवात्मा भी इस जिस शरीर का त्याग करता है उससे मन सहित इंद्रियों को ग्रहण करके फिर नए शरीर को प्राप्त होता है. So the Jivatma carries the balance of your sense organs, of your mind, of your intellect, and then goes away and takes a new body. Now, this is the process which has been explained here. Then, if we look at some of the other verses, in one particular verse, I think that's in chapter 12, Arjun had specifically asked Lord Krishna that those who worship you without form and those who worship you in form, which is better? So he explains that so that the Lord can exist both in form and non form. And then in last chapter, he talks about that you surrender everything to me. Don't get confused into all these principles of dharma and shastras. You surrender yourself to me and I'll take care of you. So we have seen these verses and what Lord Krishna has said. There are also, I think, a few more verses from chapter 15. So let's have a look at that also. Verse number 16. इस संसार में नासवान और अविनाशी ये दो प्रकार के पुरुष हैं जिसमें संपूर्ण भूत प्राणियों के शरीर तो नासवान है और जीवात्मा अविनाशी कहा गया है. So this has already been very clarified that Jivatma is Avinashi and body is subject to depreciation and dissolution. Then verse number 17. इन दोनों से उत्तम पुरुष तो अन्य ही है जो तीनों लोकों में प्रवेश करके सबका धारण पोषण करता है एवं अविनाशी परमेश्वर और परमात्मा इस प्रकार कहा गया है. नाउ हियर इट इज वेरी क्लियर दैट referring to the previous two, that is the Naswan Prakriti and Avinashi Atma, Jivatma. Compared to those two, Paramatma is higher. He is Uttam. Jo, he is everywhere in all the three lokas and he looks after the entire universe. So this makes it absolutely clear that Paramatma is different from Jivatma. And then he also clarifies it further in verse number 18, 15, 18. क्योंकि मैं नासवान जड़ वर्ग क्षेत्र से तो सर्वथा अतीत हूं और अविनाशी जीवात्मा से भी उत्तम हूं इसलिए लोक में और वेद में पुरुषोत्तम के नाम से प्रसिद्ध हूं. So now I think there's total clarity in what Lord Krishna has said that Jivatma is Avinashi. It is not subject to birth or death or depreciation. And Prakriti is subject to change, that is Maya, which is governed by three gunas, Sat, Raj, and Tam. And we remain constantly embedded in Prakriti because our Jivatma is surrounded by the body, which is Prakriti, and controlled by, in certain ways by Prakriti. And we are subject to pain and pleasure which our body experiences. But then he clarified that Supreme is different. Now, how do we reconcile this with Aham Atma, uh, Brahmasmi, or Ayam Atma Brahma Tattvamasi? How do we reconcile that? This question comes up that are they, contradicting each other? They are different. What has been said here, what has been said earlier. Now, they are not actually contradicting. You see, it is a process. The Jivatma is existing in infinite numbers. When you go and walk on the earth, you will find millions of insects, and they are existing in millions of quantity. For example, ants. You go anywhere, you find thousands of ants. In the rainy season, you find all kinds of insects, mosquitoes, birds, animals. The bigger animals may be lesser in number, but there are a lot of smaller insects and animals which you cannot count. So the Jivatma exists in infinite numbers. Like there are infinite sources of water, all kinds of lakes and ponds and wells and rivers and even a small little gadda with water. That's also a water body. So there are innumerable water bodies. Similarly, there are innumerable uh, forms of life which are existing. Even human beings alone, there are about 8 billion today. And if you can count, for example, the population of ants, it may be, I don't know how many billions, maybe trillions, or mosquitoes, maybe billions. So all that, or fish, for example, so many in huge ocean filled with fish. And there are so many other life forms. There are three varieties of forms, as we call them. Bhuchar, which are walking on the earth, Jalchar, which are living in the water, and uh, Bhuchal, Jelchar, and the birds which are actually flying in the sky. So all these life forms are innumerable. So that is very clear that innumerable life forms exist and they are all living because of the soul. They have a soul too, but of course the body is not well developed and therefore the soul is not able to function as we do in human body. That is why human body is called a privileged body in which you can, like we are talking, we are understanding each other, we can read, we can write, we can, invent things, we can do variety of paintings, and people can create aircrafts. All that is possible only in the human form, not in other forms. For example, a dog cannot talk about Vedic writings and cannot discuss all these things as we do. So, this is the most elevated form of existence in this universe. Now, how do we reconcile these two things? The reconciliation is not that difficult. As long as we remain entangled in this world of Maya, and so long as our consciousness or Jivatma is surrounded by a body or controlled by a body, then we will be subject to the pains and pleasures of life. We will have thought process, we will do things, and we will reap the harvest of what we are doing. But once you are out of that process, once you have transcended the nature, once you have gone beyond the world of Maya and become one with the Supreme, then actually your Jivatma gets altered and becomes part of the Supreme. And it does not come back into the universe. It does not mean that it becomes the Supreme, no, but it becomes part of the Supreme. And it remains in that what Lord Krishna has mentioned, Parampad. You go and stay in that Parampad forever, in universal eternal bliss. But you do not become the Supreme. You become part of the Supreme. The Supreme is Purn, and that is why we have this verse that He is Purn, and whatever comes out of it is Purn, and despite that, uh, He still remains Purn. So the Supreme is Purn. Jivatma is not Purn in that sense. It is once it goes and merges into the Supreme, we do away with all the desires and it becomes like, without any desires. And it experiences eternal bliss because once you have experienced eternal bliss, there's no need of desires that we discussed in our last session. The desires arise because we are not satisfied with what we are. If we are satisfied with what we are, if we are happy with what we are, then there's no need of desires further down. Desires will not happen. Desires actually indicate that we are not satisfied. If I want to do more, if I want to, make my business bigger and bigger, if I want to earn more money, if I want to travel more, if I want to go to, different places around the world, it means that I'm not satisfied. There's something is missing. And that is why I'm doing that. So desires is an indication of uh, inherently missing part of human system. But once we have reached the total bliss, the state of Anand, then those desires will disappear. So once the Jivatma reaches the Supreme, transcending all the, what we call temptation of Maya, then you become part of the Supreme, but you do not become Supreme. This is the difference. This is my understanding. Supreme remains the Supreme. He is controlling the entire universe. And he is pervading the Isa Vasyamidam Sarvam, that he pervades the entire universe everywhere. We call it Kan Kan Mein Bhagwan Hai. That means that he exists in every single particle of this universe. So that is my understanding. But if we have some doubts on this issue, we don't have to get ourselves entangled into that process. The doubts can remain because people like Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, and there are many other scholars, even they have different views on this issue. So we don't have to get into that process. Our process is very simple that we try to get out of this process of Maya. Like, when you come out of a film, you feel, oh, it was a film, I was unnecessarily emotional and crying there. It was just, an imaginary thing which was happening on the curtain. And that was just play of sound and light. But it leaves an impact that time. But afterwards we realize that it was nothing. Why did I do all that? So similarly, once we leave this, world of Maya, we will also feel that this was merely a play. It was merely a theater in which all this was happening. Why did I unnecessarily pass through this process of pain and pleasure? And then you become indifferent to that. And then you transcend this world of Maya and you become one with the Supreme. So my viewpoint here was only one, that this question has arisen in variety of forms with great scholars as well. That actually I am Atma Brahma or I am Brahmasmi or Tattvamasi. We should not get into that process, and we should not presume that those great, humans who became one with the Supreme, they became Supreme. No, they became part of the Supreme. They will not come back into this universe to pass through the birth and death and all the pains and pleasure we experience. And they are living in eternal bliss with the Supreme in that what we call Parampad. But they cannot be called Supreme. because there is a difference between Atma and Parmatma, which we have seen through different verses of Bhagavad Gita itself, that Parmatma is supreme who looks after the entire universe. We are a particle of that. Once we go back, the particle goes back to the principle, but it doesn't become the principle. It's like, you know, in our own body also, we have so many organs. Now, if you take out one organ and it goes back to the body, the organ doesn't become the body. The organ remains organ all the time. Whether it comes out or it goes in. If my hand is cut and then again you take out the hand, then it remains the hand. It is not the body. But it goes back to the body, then it becomes body. It is not independently body. It's part of the body. So that is how I look at it, because this question was raised by Tarun, and I think I got one or two messages that how do we deal with this subject. So I thought this is a good time to understand this when we are concluding who am I. So I does not become the supreme. Once you leave the I part, it becomes part of the supreme, but not the supreme itself. So there is three things here in this universe, what we call Brahma, Jeev, and Maya. So Brahma is the supreme, Jeev is an individual soul, and Maya is the nature. So as Lord Krishna said that Maya, that nature and soul both are eternal, and supreme is also eternal. But there is a difference between all of them. One is subject to Maya, that is, the human soul is subject to Maya, while one is the controller of Maya, the Paramatma is the controller force of the nature as well. Like as he explained in chapter 7, that from my Parashakti, eight elements, then Aparashakti, eight elements arise. That is the Akash, then Vayu, Agni, Jal, Prithvi, Man, Buddhi, and Ahankar. So these arise from the Parashakti. That is, the nature comes from there. The Maya comes from there. This is what Maya is all about. Maya is consisting of these eight elements. And then Parashakti gives the life. That is the life force. And here also in chapter 15, he very clearly said, ये मेरा अंश है, ये जो जीवात्मा है वो मेरा एक अंश है. So I think this is how we should look at it. I hope now it becomes clear, but even if it is not clear, it doesn't matter. We don't need any clarity on this issue. Our clarity is very clear. That is, we should transcend the world of Maya and try to become one with the Supreme. That's it. Whether we become Supreme or not, let's leave it aside. We are not concerned with it. What we are concerned is that we should become a yogi. Yogi is the one who becomes one with the Supreme. Yog ho jata hai Supreme. Yukt. In English, it's called yoke. So you become one with the Supreme. And Lord Krishna has called it Parampad, that you will go into that final stage of existence. Param is final, and Pad is the stage where you are established and you remain established. So I think this is what I thought I would, mention on this particular issue. I hope things are clear. But even if they are not clear, don't worry. As I said, let's worry only on one thing, that we should try to understand the soul which is in our body, understand that soul, and redeem that soul from the various attractions of Maya. Once we achieve that, I think we have achieved the purpose of our life. And that is what we should work for. I don't know whether it would be possible in one lifetime, but if we continue this process, in a few lifetimes, we will certainly overcome this and become one with the Supreme. So thank you very much.